Karoline Leavitt had always been the kind of person who noticed things others overlooked. She wasn't flashy or loud, just someone who paid attention. A freelance journalist by profession and a mom to two energetic kids, her life revolved around deadlines, school runs, and trying to find a moment of peace in between. But on one crisp autumn morning, while dropping off some old yearbooks to her high school alma mater, Lincoln High, something unusual caught her eye. As she walked through the familiar hallways now painted in fresh coats of blue and white, Karoline felt a wave of nostalgia hit her. The lockers looked newer, the classrooms brighter, but the smell of chalk dust and polished floors was still the same. It was comforting, like stepping back into a simpler time. Then, out of the corner of her eye, she spotted him, an elderly man mopping near the cafeteria. His movements were slow but steady, his hands gripping the mop handle with practiced ease. There was something about him that seemed familiar. At first, Karoline couldn't quite place it. He wore a faded uniform shirt and a pair of sturdy work boots, his gray hair neatly combed under a cap. But when he turned slightly to empty the mop bucket, recognition dawned on her. "Mr. Thompson?" she called out softly, not wanting to startle him. The man stopped mid-motion and turned toward her, squinting as if trying to figure out who this stranger was. Then suddenly his face broke into a wide grin. "Well, I'll be," he said, his voice warm and gravelly. "Karoline Leavitt, you were one of my favorite students back in the day." Hearing those words took Karoline aback. Favorite student? She hadn't thought much about Mr. Thompson during her teenage years. He was just the janitor, someone who blended into the background of daily school life. Yet here he was, remembering her name after all these years. They exchanged pleasantries, and as they talked, Karoline learned that Mr. Thompson was still working at the school, at the age of 80. 80. He explained that he enjoyed the routine and the sense of purpose it gave him. "Keeps me young," he joked, though the lines on his face told a different story. But what struck Karoline most was how content he seemed. Despite his age and the physical demands of the job, there was a quiet pride in his demeanor. He spoke fondly of the students, the teachers, and even the occasional mischief makers who tried to sneak snacks into class. "They keep me on my toes," he chuckled, leaning against the mop handle. That brief conversation stayed with Karoline long after she left the school. Driving home, she couldn't shake the image of Mr. Thompson mopping the floors, just as he had done decades earlier when she was a student. Back then, she'd barely given him a second thought. To her younger self, he was part of the scenery, someone whose presence was expected but rarely acknowledged. Now, as an adult, she saw him differently, as a man who had dedicated his life to serving others, often without thanks or recognition. That evening, as she sat at her kitchen table sipping tea, Karoline found herself scrolling through old photos on her phone. Her mind kept drifting back to Mr. Thompson. What must his life have been like outside of school? Did anyone ever stop to appreciate all the years he spent keeping Lincoln High clean and running smoothly? The more she thought about it, the more she realized how easy it was to take people like him for granted. A spark of curiosity ignited within her. Maybe she could write about him. As a journalist, she was always looking for interesting stories, and this felt personal somehow. Not just another article, but a chance to shine a light on someone who deserved it. The idea excited her, but it also made her nervous. Would anyone care? Would Mr. Thompson even want the attention? The next day, Karoline returned to Lincoln High, this time with a notebook in hand. She approached Mr. Thompson again, explaining that she wanted to feature him in a piece for her local newspaper column. At first he seemed hesitant, brushing off the idea with a humble laugh. "There's nothing special about me," he insisted. But Karoline persisted, gently convincing him that his story mattered. After some coaxing, he agreed to share bits and pieces of his life with her. Over the following weeks, Karoline visited the school regularly, chatting with Mr. Thompson during his breaks. She learned that he had started working at Lincoln High in his late 20s, shortly after moving to town with his wife. Together they raised 3 children, sending them all to the same school where he worked. Over the years, he watched generations of students grow up, graduate, and move on to bigger things. Some became doctors, teachers, and engineers. Others struggled to find their footing in the world. Through it all, Mr. Thompson remained a constant presence, quietly supporting everyone in his own way. What amazed Karoline most was how much respect the staff and students had for him. Teachers spoke highly of his work ethic, praising the way he went above and beyond to ensure the school was spotless. Students, too, remembered him fondly, recalling how he would offer kind words or lend an ear when they needed it most. One teacher even shared a story about how Mr. Thompson once stayed late to help fix a broken pipe, refusing to leave until the problem was resolved. Yet, despite his contributions, Mr. Thompson had never sought recognition. For him, it was simply about doing his job well and being there for the people around him. Hearing these stories deepened Karoline's admiration for the man. Here was someone who had poured decades of his life into serving others, asking for nothing in return. And yet no one had ever truly thanked him, not the way he deserved. As Karoline pieced together his story, she began to feel a growing sense of responsibility. Writing an article felt like a good start, but it didn't seem enough. How could she honor Mr. Thompson's legacy in a way that truly reflected the impact he'd made? That question lingered in her mind, planting the seeds of an idea that would soon grow into something far greater than she ever imagined. As Karoline dug deeper into Mr. Thompson's life, she began to see him not just as a janitor but as a cornerstone of the community. Every story she uncovered added another layer to the quiet legacy he had built over the years. One afternoon, while sitting in the school cafeteria with her notebook, she struck up a conversation with Mrs. Adler, a veteran teacher who had been at Lincoln High almost as long as Mr. Thompson. "You know," Mrs. Adler said thoughtfully, stirring her coffee, "he's always been there for us, teachers and students alike. He doesn't say much, but his actions speak volumes." Mrs. Adler went on to share a memory that stuck with Karoline. Years ago, during a particularly harsh winter storm, the school's heating system broke down. The administration scrambled to find solutions, but it was Mr. Thompson who stayed late into the night, figuring out how to get the furnace running again. By the time he left, his fingers were raw from the cold, but the school was warm and ready for classes the next morning. No one ever formally thanked him for it. He just did what needed to be done. Karoline couldn't help but wonder how many other moments like that had gone unnoticed. How many times had Mr. Thompson quietly stepped in to fix problems or offer support without expecting anything in return? These questions weighed heavily on her mind. She realized that writing an article, no matter how heartfelt, wouldn't fully capture the depth of his contributions. Something bigger was needed. Something that would bring the entire community together to show their gratitude. That evening, as Karoline sat at her kitchen table brainstorming ideas, her kids burst through the door, laughing and talking over each other about their day. Her youngest, a spirited 8-year-old, proudly announced that she'd won a spelling bee at school. Watching her daughter's excitement reminded Karoline of how small acts of recognition could mean so much. It gave her an idea, one that felt both ambitious and necessary. The next morning, Karoline decided to take action. She drafted an email to former classmates from her graduating class, explaining Mr. Thompson's story and proposing a surprise celebration in his honor. At first, she wasn't sure how people would respond. Would they care about a janitor they hadn't thought about in decades? But as the replies started trickling in, she was pleasantly surprised. Many of her old classmates remembered Mr. Thompson fondly, sharing stories of how he'd helped them during tough times, or simply brightened their days with a kind word. Encouraged by the positive response, Karoline expanded her outreach. She reached out to current teachers, local business owners, and even alumni from other graduating classes. Slowly but surely, a plan began to take shape. The goal was simple, yet powerful. Organize a special event to honor Mr. Thompson and raise funds to ensure he could retire comfortably. She envisioned a large gathering in the school gymnasium, complete with speeches, music, and a presentation highlighting his years of service. But organizing such an event wasn't easy. Between coordinating with the school principal, securing donations, and managing logistics, Karoline found herself busier than ever. there were moments when doubt crept in. What if no one showed up? What if Mr. Thompson felt uncomfortable being the center of attention? Yet every time she considered giving up, she thought about the look on his face when they spoke, the pride and humility that radiated from him, and it reignited her determination. To spread the word, Karoline created flyers and posted them around town. She also wrote a heartfelt post on social media, sharing snippets of Mr. Thompson's story and inviting people to contribute however they could. Some donated money, while others offered to volunteer their time or services. A local bakery promised to bake a cake for free, and a musician agreed to perform at the event. Each act of generosity filled Karoline with hope and renewed energy. As the date of the celebration approached, anticipation grew. People from all walks of life came together, united by a shared desire to thank someone who had touched their lives in ways big and small. Even those who hadn't known Mr. Thompson personally wanted to be part of something meaningful. For Karoline, watching the community rally behind this cause was deeply moving. It reminded her of the power of collective effort and the importance of recognizing unsung heroes. Finally, the big day arrived. The school gymnasium buzzed with excitement as students, teachers, alumni, and townsfolk gathered for the assembly. Karoline had worked tirelessly to keep the event a secret from Mr. Thompson, convincing the principal to invite him under the pretense of discussing routine maintenance tasks. When he walked in, clutching his mop bucket and looking slightly confused, the room erupted into thunderous applause. For a moment, Mr. Thompson froze, clearly unsure of what was happening. Then, as banners reading, "Thank you, Mr. Thompson," unfurled above him and dozens of smiling faces turned his way, realization dawned. Tears welled up in his eyes as Karoline stepped forward, holding a microphone and addressing the crowd. "This is for you," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "For all the years of hard work, kindness, and dedication you've shown us. We see you, we appreciate you, and will never forget you." The room fell silent as she presented him with a plaque commemorating his service and a check representing the funds raised. Cheers erupted once more, echoing off the walls of the gymnasium. Overwhelmed, Mr. Thompson struggled to find words. Finally, he managed to choke out, "I don't know what to say. Thank you. From the bottom of my heart." In that moment, Karoline knew it had all been worth it. This wasn't just about honoring one man. It was about reminding everyone present of the value of gratitude and community. As the celebration continued with laughter, music, and heartfelt speeches filling the air, Karoline felt a profound sense of fulfillment. She had set out to tell a story, but in doing so, she had sparked something far greater, a movement to recognize and celebrate the everyday heroes among us. Little did she know, this was only the beginning. The celebration for Mr. Thompson didn't end with the applause and cheers in the gymnasium. It was just the beginning of something much bigger. As word spread about the event, people who hadn't been able to attend started reaching out to Karoline, asking how they could still contribute. Some sent checks in the mail, while others dropped off gift cards or handmade notes at the school office. The outpouring of support was overwhelming, not just for Mr. Thompson, but for Karoline, too. She had never imagined that her small idea would grow into a community-wide movement. One afternoon, as she sorted through the donations and messages, Karoline came across a letter that stopped her in her tracks. It was from a former student who had graduated nearly 2 decades earlier. In neat handwriting, the person wrote about how Mr. Thompson had once quietly slipped them lunch money when they were struggling to make ends meet. "I was too embarrassed to tell anyone at the time," the note read, but Mr. Thompson noticed. He didn't say a word. He just handed me a few dollars and told me to take care of myself. That small act of kindness meant everything to me. Karoline felt tears welling up in her eyes as she read the letter. Stories like this weren't uncommon. They kept pouring in, each one painting a clearer picture of the man Mr. Thompson truly was. He wasn't just a janitor, he was a guardian, angel in disguise, always watching out for others without expecting anything in return. These stories reinforced Karoline's belief that there were countless unsung heroes like him, people whose quiet contributions shaped communities in ways most people never realized. Inspired by the response, Karoline decided to take things a step further. While the fundraiser had provided Mr. Thompson with financial security, she wanted to ensure his legacy lived on beyond the celebration. What if she could create a platform to spotlight other everyday heroes? People who worked tirelessly behind the scenes, often going unnoticed but making a real difference in the lives of others. With that thought in mind, Karoline launched a blog called Everyday Heroes. Her goal was simple: to share stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Whether it was a teacher mentoring struggling students, a neighbor helping elderly residents with groceries, or a bus driver ensuring kids got home safely, Karoline believed these stories deserved to be told. Each post was written with care, focusing not just on what the person did but why it mattered. She included photos, quotes, and personal reflections, aiming to make every story relatable and heartfelt. At first, Karoline wasn't sure how the blog would be received. Would people care about these seemingly small acts of kindness? But within weeks, the response was incredible. Readers from all over began sharing their own stories, thanking Karoline for shining a light on the importance of gratitude and connection. Local newspapers picked up on the blog, and soon Karoline found herself being interviewed on radio shows and even appearing on a morning news segment. Her message resonated deeply with audiences. Everyone has the power to make a difference, no matter how big or small. For Mr. Thompson, life after the celebration changed in ways he never expected. With the financial support from the fundraiser, he finally retired, trading in his mop bucket for gardening gloves and volunteer shifts at a nearby senior center. Though he no longer cleaned the halls of Lincoln High, his presence lingered in the memories of everyone he had touched. Students passing by the cafeteria often pointed out where he used to mop, sharing stories with newcomers about the man who had become a legend in their school's history. But retirement didn't slow Mr. Thompson down. Instead, he embraced it with the same humility and grace that defined his years at the school. He spent his days tending to his garden, growing vegetables that he donated to local food banks. On weekends, he volunteered at the senior center, playing chess with residents and helping them write letters to family members. His optimism remained infectious, inspiring those around him to find joy in the little things. Karoline stayed in touch with Mr. Thompson, visiting him regularly to check in and update him on the blog's progress. Their conversations often turned into brainstorming sessions, with Mr. Thompson offering suggestions for new stories or sharing insights about the importance of recognizing people's efforts. "It's not about the recognition itself," he told her one day, sipping tea on his porch. "It's about letting someone know they're seen. That's what matters." Those words stuck with Karoline. They reminded her why she had started this journey in the first place, not to seek fame or attention, but to remind people of the value of noticing and appreciating one another. Through her blog, she hoped to inspire others to look beyond themselves and acknowledge the contributions of those around them. And judging by the feedback she received, she was succeeding. As months passed, Karoline noticed a shift in her own perspective as well. Before meeting Mr. Thompson again, she had been so caught up in the hustle of daily life that she rarely paused to reflect on the impact of small gestures. Now, she found herself paying closer attention to the cashier at the grocery store, the postal worker delivering mail, the crossing guard helping kids get to school safely. She realized that everyone had a story worth telling, and sometimes all it took was a moment of acknowledgement to brighten someone's day. Her kids noticed the change too. One evening, as they sat around the dinner table, her youngest piped, "Mom, I helped clean up the art supplies at school today because I thought it might make the janitor happy." Karoline smiled, realizing that her efforts were rippling outward, teaching her children the importance of kindness and gratitude. Meanwhile, the blog continued to gain traction, drawing readers from across the country. People began nominating individuals in their own communities to be featured, sending in heartfelt testimonials and photos. Karoline worked tirelessly to keep up with the demand, knowing that each story had the potential to inspire others. She also collaborated with local organizations to host events similar to Mr. Thompson's celebration, bringing communities together to honor their unsung heroes. Through it all, Karoline remained grounded, reminding herself that this wasn't about her. It was about the people whose stories she was privileged to share. Every time she published a new post, she felt a sense of fulfillment, knowing she was contributing to something greater than herself. And every time she visited Mr. Thompson, she was reminded of the ripple effect one act of kindness could have. Years later, when asked about her proudest accomplishment, Karoline always smiled and said, "It wasn't anything I did alone. It was the collective effort of so many people coming together to celebrate someone who deserved it. That's what makes it special." And deep down, she knew that Mr. Thompson's story and the movement it sparked would continue to inspire generations to come. As the weeks turned into months, the momentum behind Karoline's blog, Everyday Heroes, only grew stronger. What had started as a personal project to honor Mr. Thompson had blossomed into something far bigger than she ever imagined. People from all walks of life began reaching out to her. Teachers, nurses, bus drivers, grocery store clerks, and even strangers who simply wanted to share stories about someone who had made a difference in their lives. Each email or message was like opening a treasure chest filled with heartfelt gratitude and untold acts of kindness. One day, while scrolling through her inbox, Karoline came across a submission that stopped her cold. It was from a woman who worked at a homeless shelter in a neighboring town. She wrote about an elderly volunteer named Edna, who spent every Saturday morning cooking meals for the residents. According to the woman, Edna didn't just cook, she listened. She sat with people, asked about their lives, and offered words of encouragement when they needed it most. "She doesn't see them as homeless," the woman wrote. "She sees them as human beings deserving of love and respect." Karoline felt a lump rise in her throat as she read the story. It reminded her so much of Mr. Thompson. The quiet dedication, the selflessness, the ability to make others feel seen. She knew instantly that Edna's story needed to be told. After contacting the woman to get more details, Karoline arranged to visit the shelter herself. When she met Edna, she was struck by how humble and unassuming she was, much like Mr. Thompson. Dressed in a simple apron, her hands dusted with flour, Edna greeted Karoline warmly, but seemed surprised that anyone would want to write about her. "I'm nobody special," Edna said with a shrug, stirring a pot of soup on the stove. "I just do what I can." But to the people at the shelter, Edna was everything. One resident, a young man named Tom, shared how Edna had helped him rebuild his confidence after years of struggling with addiction. "She never judged me," he said softly. "She just kept telling me I was worth something. That changed everything for me." Karoline left the shelter feeling inspired yet humbled. Writing Edna's story reinforced her belief that everyone has the power to create ripples of change, no matter how small their actions might seem. And as she published the post, she watched it resonate deeply with readers. Comments poured in, thanking Edna for her compassion and urging others to find ways to give back to their own communities. The success of the blog opened doors Karoline hadn't anticipated. Local businesses started approaching her, offering sponsorships or partnerships to help amplify the message of gratitude and recognition. A bookstore owner suggested hosting an event where community members could nominate local heroes to be featured on the blog. Another business donated printing services to create posters and flyers promoting the initiative. Even schools began incorporating discussions about everyday heroes into their curriculum, encouraging students to think about the people in their lives who deserved acknowledgement. Karoline embraced these opportunities, knowing they could help spread the movement even further. But she also stayed true to her roots, ensuring that the focus remained on the individuals being celebrated rather than any external rewards. For her, it wasn't about building a brand or gaining followers. It was about fostering connections and reminding people of the importance of noticing one another. Meanwhile, Mr. Thompson continued to thrive in retirement. Though he no longer walked the halls of Lincoln High, his influence lingered in countless ways. Teachers often brought up his name during staff meetings, using him as an example of dedication and perseverance. Students, too, carried forward the lessons they had learned from him, whether it was showing up consistently, treating others with kindness, or finding joy in the little things. Some even visited him at his home, bringing homemade treats or simply stopping by to chat. One afternoon, while helping Mr. Thompson tend to his garden, Karoline noticed a stack of letters on his kitchen table. Curious, she asked if they were from old students or colleagues. He chuckled and nodded, explaining that he had been receiving notes from people all over the country, many of whom he hadn't seen in decades. "They're thanking me for things I don't even remember doing," he said with a grin. "It's funny, isn't it? Sometimes we don't realize the impact we have until someone points it out." Karoline smiled, thinking about how true that statement was. So often, people underestimated the weight of their actions, dismissing them as insignificant. Yet time and again, she saw proof that even the smallest gestures could leave lasting impressions. Whether it was Edna feeding the hungry, Mr. Thompson mopping floors, or a stranger holding open a door, every act of kindness mattered. Inspired by this realization, Karoline decided to take her efforts one step further. She began organizing workshops and speaking engagements, sharing her journey and encouraging others to start recognizing the heroes in their own lives. Her talks weren't flashy or overly rehearsed. They were raw and authentic, filled with anecdotes and lessons she had learned along the way. Audiences connected with her immediately, hanging on to every word as she spoke about the transformative power of gratitude. At one particular event, held in a cozy community center, a young mother approached Karoline afterward, tears streaming down her face. "Your story about Mr. Thompson made me think of my son's daycare teacher," she said. "She works so hard to make sure every child feels loved and safe, but I don't think she realizes how much she means to us. I want to nominate her for your blog." Karoline's heart swelled hearing this. This was exactly what she had hoped. For to inspire others to look around and appreciate the people making a difference in their daily lives. She handed the woman a nomination form and encouraged her to share the teacher's story. "You have no idea how much it will mean to her," Karoline said gently. By now, the ripple effect of Karoline's work was undeniable. Communities across the region were coming together to celebrate their unsung heroes, organizing events, fundraisers, and public acknowledgments. People were starting to see the value in slowing down and paying attention, not just to the big moments, but to the quiet, consistent ones that often went unnoticed. It was a cultural shift, subtle yet profound, sparked by a single act of gratitude toward an 80-year-old janitor. And through it all, Karoline remained steadfast in her mission. Every story she shared, every person she highlighted, reinforced her belief in the goodness of humanity. There were still challenges, of course, days when emails went unanswered or stories fell flat, but she refused to let setbacks dampen her spirit. Instead, she leaned on the support of those around her, including Mr. Thompson, who continued to offer wisdom and encouragement whenever she doubted herself. "You've already done more than you know," he told her one evening as they sat on his porch watching the sunset. "Don't forget that." Those words stuck with Karoline long after she left. They reminded her why she had started this journey in the first place, not for fame or recognition, but to shine a light on the beauty hidden in plain sight. And as she looked ahead to the future, she knew there were countless more stories waiting to be told, countless more heroes waiting to be celebrated. Little did she know, the best was yet to come. As the months rolled on, Karoline's mission began to take on a life of its own. The blog had grown into something much bigger than a collection of stories. It was becoming a movement. People weren't just reading about everyday heroes. They were inspired to become them. Strangers started reaching out to share how the blog had changed their perspective, encouraging them to notice the small acts of kindness around them and respond in kind. One woman wrote to say she now made it a point to thank the barista at her local coffee shop by name every morning. Another man shared that he'd begun volunteering at a community garden after reading about Edna and her work at the homeless shelter. The impact wasn't limited to individuals either. Entire neighborhoods were coming together to celebrate unsung heroes in creative ways. In one town, residents organized a gratitude walk where people posted signs along the sidewalks thanking postal workers, trash collectors, and crossing guards. In another, a group of parents surprised a school custodian with a surprise party, complete with handmade cards from students and a gift basket filled with his favorite snacks. These grassroots efforts showed Karoline just how far her simple idea had spread, and how deeply it resonated with people. But perhaps the most unexpected development came when a local news station featured Karoline and her blog in a segment called Community Champions. The reporter interviewed her at length, asking about her inspiration and the stories that had touched her the most. When the piece aired, the response was overwhelming. Emails and messages flooded in from viewers across the state, eager to nominate someone or simply express how moved they were by the concept of celebrating ordinary people doing extraordinary things. One message stood out among the rest. It was from a nurse who worked long hours at a busy hospital. She wrote about a patient transport aide named Joe, who went above and beyond to comfort patients during what were often some of the scariest moments of their lives. According to the nurse, Joe didn't just wheel patients from one room to another. He cracked jokes to ease their nerves, held hands when they cried, and always remembered their names. "He makes this place feel less like a hospital and more like home," she wrote. "We couldn't do our jobs without him." Karoline knew instantly that Joe's story needed to be told. After arranging a visit to the hospital, she met him in the bustling hallway where he was pushing a wheelchair with a warm smile. Like so many others she'd profiled, Joe was humble almost to a fault. "I'm just doing my job," he said, shrugging off her praise. But when she asked if she could interview him, he agreed, though he seemed skeptical about why anyone would care. What struck Karoline most during their conversation was Joe's genuine love for what he did. He spoke passionately about the importance of making patients feel comfortable and respected, even in the chaos of a hospital. "They're scared, you know," he said softly. "And sometimes all it takes is a little kindness to remind them they're not alone." When Karoline published Joe's story, it quickly became one of the most read posts on the blog. Readers connected deeply with his compassion and humility, many commenting that they wished there were more people like him in the world. The hospital administration took notice too, presenting Joe with an award for excellence in patient care, a gesture that left him visibly emotional. "I never expected this," he admitted during the ceremony. "All I ever wanted was to help people." Seeing Joe receive recognition reinforced Karoline's belief that everyone craved acknowledgement, no matter how modest they might seem. So often, people dismissed their contributions as insignificant, believing that only grand gestures mattered. But through her work, Karoline was proving otherwise, showing that the quiet, consistent acts of kindness were just as vital, if not more so. At the same time, Karoline continued to grow personally through the process. Writing these stories forced her to slow down and pay closer attention to the world around her. She found herself noticing things she might have overlooked before. The way a grocery store cashier greeted each customer with a smile. The patience of a librarian helping a child find a book. The dedication of a road worker braving the cold to repair potholes. These moments, once invisible, now felt monumental. Her kids noticed the shift in her too. They began mimicking her behavior, pointing out acts of kindness wherever they saw them. Her oldest child, a teenager who usually preferred scrolling on his phone to engaging with the world, surprised her one evening by saying, "Mom, I think Mr. Patel at the corner store deserves a shout-out. He always remembers my order and asks how school is going." Karoline smiled, realizing that her efforts were shaping her family's outlook as well. Meanwhile, Mr. Thompson remained a steady presence in Karoline's life. Though retired, he stayed active in the community, volunteering at the senior center, and tending to his garden. His vegetables, which he donated to local food banks, became somewhat legendary, with people referring to them as Thompson's Greens. Karoline visited him regularly, sharing updates about the blog and swapping stories about the people they had met along the way. Their friendship had deepened over time, built on mutual respect and admiration. One afternoon, while sipping tea, on his porch, Mr. Thompson posed a question that caught Karoline off guard. "Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if you hadn't walked into that school that day?" he asked thoughtfully. Karoline paused, considering the weight of his words. It was true. Her chance encounter with him had set off a chain reaction that transformed not only her life but countless others. Yet she couldn't imagine it any other way. I don't think about it much, she admitted, because meeting you reminded me of something important, that we all have the power to make a difference no matter who we are or what we do. Mr. Thompson nodded, a twinkle in his eye. Well, I'm glad I could be part of it. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light across the yard, Karoline felt a profound sense of gratitude, not just for Mr. Thompson, but for everyone who had contributed to the journey. Each story, each act of kindness, each person she had met along the way had taught her something valuable. Together, they had created a tapestry of humanity, woven with threads of compassion and connection. But Karoline also knew the work was far from over. There were still so many stories waiting to be told, so many heroes yet to be celebrated. And as long as there were people willing to listen, she vowed to keep shining a light on the beauty hidden in plain sight. Because in a world that often felt divided, these stories served as reminders of what united us, our capacity to care, to give, and to uplift one another. With renewed determination, Karoline returned to her laptop, ready to write the next chapter in this ever-evolving journey. Little did she know, the best stories were still ahead, and they would challenge her in ways she couldn't yet imagine. As the month stretched into a year, Karoline's blog had grown beyond anything she could have imagined. What started as a heartfelt tribute to Mr. Thompson had become a beacon of hope and gratitude for people everywhere. The stories she shared weren't just inspiring, they were changing lives. Readers began reaching out not only to nominate heroes, but also to share how the blog had impacted them personally. Some said it had pushed them to reconnect with old friends or family members they'd lost touch with. Others talked about how it made them rethink their own actions, encouraging them to be kinder, more patient, and more observant in their daily lives. One day, while scrolling through her inbox, Karoline came across an email that stood out from the rest. It was from a woman who worked at a small animal shelter on the outskirts of town. She wrote about a volunteer named Ruth, a retired school teacher who spent every Friday afternoon bathing and grooming the dogs, no matter how dirty or smelly they were. She treats each one like it's her own, the woman explained, and when people come to adopt, she sits with them for hours, making sure the match is perfect. She says these animals deserve nothing less. Karoline felt a lump rise in her throat as she read the message. There was something deeply moving about Ruth's dedication, not just to the animals, but to ensuring they found loving homes. She knew this was a story worth telling. After contacting the shelter, she arranged to visit on a Friday afternoon, hoping to meet Ruth in action. When she arrived, the scene was chaotic, yet heartwarming. Dogs barked excitedly from their kennels, cats peeked curiously from perches, and volunteers scurried around, tending to feeding schedules and cleaning duties. In the middle of it all stood Ruth, wearing a bright yellow apron splattered with water and fur. Her hands moved deftly as she scrubbed a scruffy golden retriever mix, humming softly under her breath. Despite the chaos, there was a calmness about her, a quiet focus that drew you in. Karoline approached cautiously, not wanting to interrupt. "Hi, are you Ruth?" she asked, holding up her notebook. Ruth turned, smiling warmly despite the suds dripping down her arms. "That's me," she said with a chuckle. "What can I do for you?" After explaining her mission, Karoline asked if she could sit with Ruth while she worked. Over the next few hours, they chatted about everything: the challenges of running a shelter, the joy of seeing a dog find its forever home, and the heartbreaking moments when it didn't work out. Ruth spoke candidly about why she volunteered, saying simply, "These animals need someone to fight for them. If I can make even one life better, it's worth it." By the time Karoline left the shelter, she knew she had uncovered another gem of a story. When she published Ruth's profile, it struck a chord with readers, many of whom commented that they had never considered the hard work behind animal rescue before. Inspired by the response, some even reached out to local shelters, asking how they could help. For Ruth, the attention was unexpected but welcome. "I don't do this for recognition," she told Karoline later, "but if it means more people step up to help, then I'm grateful." The success of Ruth's story reinforced what Karoline already believed. Every act of kindness, no matter how small, had the power to inspire others. And as her blog gained traction, she noticed a shift, not just in herself, but in the communities she touched. People were starting to see the value in slowing down, paying attention, and appreciating the efforts of those around them. It wasn't just about grand gestures anymore. It was about noticing the everyday ones too. But with growth came challenges. Managing the blog had become a full-time job, and Karoline often found herself juggling deadlines, interviews, and community events. Alongside her freelance work and family responsibilities, there were days when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her, leaving her wondering if she could keep going. Yet every time doubt crept in, she thought about the faces of the people she had met: Mr. Thompson, Edna, Joe, Ruth, and the impact their stories had on others. That reminder fueled her determination to press on. Her kids continued to play a role in her journey, often pitching in where they could. Her youngest, now 9, loved helping sort through emails and drawing pictures to accompany the posts. Her teenager, once reluctant, had begun volunteering at a local food pantry after reading about Edna's work at the homeless shelter. Watching her children embrace the spirit of gratitude filled Karoline with pride. They weren't just learning about kindness, they were living it. Meanwhile, Mr. Thompson remained a guiding force in Karoline's life. Though he lived quietly, his presence loomed large over everything she did. He often reminded her to stay grounded, urging her not to lose sight of why she had started this journey in the first place. "It's not about you," he would say gently. "It's about the people whose stories you're telling." Those words stayed with Karoline, especially during moments when self-doubt crept in. She realized that the true measure of success wasn't in numbers or accolades. It was in the connections forged and the lives touched along the way. Each story, each nomination, each thank you note was proof that the movement was working. People were waking up to the beauty of humanity, finding inspiration in the unlikeliest of places. One evening, as she sat at her kitchen table drafting a new post, Karoline reflected on how far she had come. A year ago, she had been a busy mom and journalist, struggling to balance work and family. Now she was part of something bigger, a ripple effect of gratitude that was spreading farther than she ever dreamed possible. It wasn't always easy, but it was worth it. As she closed her laptop for the night, a thought occurred to her. Maybe the real heroes weren't just the people she wrote about. Maybe they were the readers too, the ones who took the time to notice, to appreciate, and to act. Together, they were proving that kindness wasn't just an individual act. It was a collective effort, a chain reaction that could transform entire communities. With that thought lingering in her mind, Karoline turned off the light, ready to face whatever tomorrow might bring. Little did she know, the best was yet to come, and the next chapter would challenge her in ways she couldn't yet imagine. The momentum of Karoline's blog continued to build, but it wasn't without its challenges. As the platform grew, so did the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. Each story she shared carried the hopes and gratitude of countless people, and Karoline often found herself wondering if she was doing enough justice to their lives. The pressure to keep up with demand, emails flooding in, interviews to schedule, posts to write, was relentless. Yet every time she felt overwhelmed, she reminded herself of why she started this journey: to honor the quiet heroes who shaped communities in ways no one else saw. One day, an email arrived that stopped her in her tracks. It was from a man who worked as a custodian at a local library. He wrote about his coworker, a woman named Clara, who had been quietly tutoring children after hours for years. According to him, Clara would stay late every Tuesday and Thursday helping kids struggling with reading or math. She never asked for extra pay or recognition. She simply believed it was the right thing to do. "She's changed so many lives," the man wrote. "But she doesn't think what she does is special." Karoline knew instantly that Clara's story needed to be told. When she visited the library later that week, she found Clara seated at a small table in the corner, surrounded by books and papers. A group of children sat around her, giggling as she patiently explained fractions using colorful shapes cut out of construction paper. Her warmth was palpable, and the kids clearly adored her. After the session ended, Karoline approached Clara, introducing herself and explaining her mission. At first, Clara seemed hesitant, brushing off the idea of being featured. "I'm just trying to help where I can," she said softly. But when Karoline pressed further, asking how tutoring had impacted her life, Clara opened up. She spoke about growing up in a household where education wasn't prioritized and how a teacher once stepped in to guide her through school. "I guess I'm just paying it forward," she admitted with a shy smile. When Karoline published Clara's story, the response was overwhelming. Teachers, parents, and even former students reached out to thank her, sharing how much her efforts meant to them. One parent wrote, "My daughter used to hate school until Clara showed her that learning could be fun. Now she reads every night, before bed." Another reader commented, "This reminds me of my own childhood tutor. I should have thanked her more." The wave of gratitude inspired Karoline to host a community event at the library to celebrate Clara's work. Dozens of people attended, including families whose children had benefited from her tutoring sessions. For Clara, the experience was humbling, yet joyful. "I didn't realize anyone noticed," she confessed during a brief speech. "All I ever wanted was to make a difference." As the weeks passed, Karoline began noticing something remarkable happening, not just in her own life but in the world around her. People were starting to see each other differently. Strangers held doors open longer, neighbors checked in on one another, and businesses went out of their way to support local charities. It was as though the stories she shared had sparked a collective awakening, reminding everyone of the power of kindness and connection. Her own family was no exception. Her youngest child, now fully immersed in the spirit of gratitude, started a kindness jar at home. Every time someone performed an act of kindness, whether big or small, they wrote it down on a slip of paper and dropped it into the jar. On Sundays, the family gathered to read the notes aloud, laughing and reflecting on the good they had done together. Even her teenager, once glued to his phone, began volunteering regularly at the food pantry, saying, "It feels good to give back." Mr. Thompson remained a constant source of wisdom and encouragement. Though he rarely sought the spotlight, he continued to inspire those around him. One afternoon, while tending to his garden, he handed Karoline a basket overflowing with fresh vegetables. "Take these to the shelter," he said with a wink. "Tell them it's from all of us." That simple gesture reminded Karoline that heroism wasn't always loud or flashy. It was often quiet, unassuming, and deeply rooted in care. As the months rolled on, Karoline realized that her journey had transformed not only her perspective, but also the way she interacted with the world. She had learned to slow down, to truly see the people around her, and to appreciate the beauty in everyday acts of kindness. More importantly, she had discovered that gratitude wasn't a finite resource, it multiplied when shared. Every story she told, every person she celebrated, created ripples that extended far beyond what she could have imagined. One evening, as she sat on her porch watching the sunset, Karoline reflected on everything that had happened since that fateful morning at Lincoln High. Meeting Mr. Thompson had set off a chain reaction that touched countless lives, including her own. Through the blog, she had uncovered stories of resilience, compassion, and hope, proving that heroes existed everywhere if you took the time to look. And through it all, she had built connections with people who reminded her of the goodness in humanity. Yet, as fulfilling as the journey had been, Karoline knew it wasn't about her. It was about the individuals whose stories she had the privilege to share. The tireless volunteers, the patient teachers, the steadfast caregivers, and everyone in between. They were the true heartbeat of the movement, and their legacies would live on long after the blog posts faded from memory. With renewed clarity, Karoline made a promise to herself to keep shining a light on the unsung heroes among us, no matter how challenging the road ahead might be. Because in a world that often felt divided, these stories served as bridges, connecting hearts, inspiring action, and reminding us all of our shared humanity. And so, with pen in hand and heart full of purpose, Karoline turned her attention to the next chapter of her journey. Little did she know, the best stories were still waiting to unfold. and they would continue to remind her that even the smallest acts of kindness could change the world.